Hi, I am Bas Rijkse from basrijkse.com. In this video, I'll share an article by Darren Hufford to give you clear insight as to why more and more Christians are sick and tired of going to the institutional church and stop attending a specific congregation. And this is the first video of a two-part series. My wife and I made a decision about 2.5 years ago that we were going to stop going to the institutional church. We did not come to this conclusion through bitterness caused by church. We simply made a decision based on the things that we had seen and personally felt for years, but were, until that time, unwilling to admit. When I say church, I'm not talking about the church universal. I'm talking about the institution of church as we know it today. For the most part, I think church is a business. In fact, many churches readily and openly admit that. I have a difficult time believing that what we know of church today is what Christ had in mind. It's become a play. And worse than that, it's become a rerun of a play, led by hijackers. Someone somewhere along the line got the idea of putting on a play for people and calling it church. The spectators sit quietly, waiting for the performance to begin. Each week they start with colorful music and someone leads them in 4 or 5 songs. Then the spectators sit down and wait for the announcements. Once that is finished, the spectators are encouraged to give money to the playhouse. Then the spectators sit quietly and listen to a guy stand up and tell them what God is saying. When he finishes, all the spectators file out of the door, pick up the children, and head for home. On the way home, they discuss the play, how the worship team did, how the pastor preached, and so on. 7 days later, they return and experience it all over again. I call it a rerun of a play because if you have been going for church for 3 years or more, that's exactly what it is. They basically quit filming new episodes and are now playing the spectators reruns of the old episodes. It's the same thing every week. Perhaps this is why Christ's ministry was only for 3 years. After that, he would only be repeating himself. Other than a new song here and there, everything else is pretty much the same. The pastor reminds you that Christ took the nails for you and you do not need to sin and you need to read your Bible and pray. And most importantly, you need to come to church every week and put money in the offering, and then it's over. Week in and week out. It's the same thing. I'm not blaming the pastors of America for this. I honestly don't think it's their fault for not preaching something new every week. Truthfully, I don't think they could even if they wanted to. I do, however, blame them for making people feel like they have to continue coming week after week, or else God will be disappointed in them. This is where the business of the playhouse comes in. People are encouraged to keep coming back because the organization needs their money. If people ever felt like they could graduate from the institution and live their lives in the world with what they know, it would be a devastating blow that eventually would destroy the institution. It is this way because church, as you and I know it today, has been built on the teaching that once you're in, you're never allowed to leave. There's no such thing as graduation or moving on. We are taught that we must attend every week for the rest of our lives, regardless of whether we know the gospel or not. If you think rationally about it, it is a ridiculous notion to think that anyone benefits much from sitting through the recap of something they already know week after week. It's even more ridiculous to believe that people need to be there every week in order to grow spiritually. My personal opinion is that it's just not worth going after a certain amount of time. It's not even set up for fellowship. You come alone, you sit alone, you worship alone, you listen to the sermon alone, and you leave alone. Real fellowship happens at Starbucks with a friend or in your home over dinner with people you love. Yes, the Bible does say do not forsake the gathering together, But that's a far cry from do not forsake going to the building and singing songs that were selected by someone else and sitting quietly while a guy talks for 45 minutes about a bunch of stuff that you have either already heard or you already knew and then leaving. That's not church, that's tradition. All in all, I think the institutional church is great for people who don't have any Christian friends. It's a great place to meet other believers. If you do have Christian friends, however, why would you continue to go? My belief is that you are the church. When people ask me where I go to church, it's like ask me where I go to Darren. I am the church. Wherever I go, the church is there because I am there. I am on outreach. Wherever I go, there's an outreach because I am there. I think the problem with the modern day church is that people go to it. It shouldn't be a place we go. Church should be something we become. I say that the modern church today is a rerun of a play that is led by hijackers because I feel that the modern day church has hijacked everything that flows naturally from people who know and love God. They have institutionalized hard things and forced them into a robotic, ritualistic set of traditions. The problem with the institution of church as we know today is that it almost always seeks to take over or hijack every living expression that results from authentic relationships. Then it tries to purchase a spiritual patent on each individual experience and dictate when and where it will manifest again. Over time, we find everything that would naturally flow from relationship with God is no longer allowed to flow naturally. It must now flow under the orders and instructions of those who run the institution. Beautiful things such as communion have now become cold and institutionalized. After all, church now owns the patent on communion. It was originally created so that people who love each other could have dinner together, and in the midst of that time of fellowship, they would stop and remember Christ and what He had accomplished on their behalf. They would acknowledge their present freedom and give praise to the one who brought it to them. Today, however, communion has been reduced to anything but communion. We now sit in neat little rows and are handed a shot of glass of grape juice and a tiny cracker. We partake of it like robot clones on a massive assembly line. There's no fellowship, no eating together, no enjoying the company of the person next to you, no interactive conversation about the work of Christ, and no freedom. You see, dinner with friends and discussing about Christ are things that naturally flow from the person who knows Christ and has freedom. The institution, however, has hijacked the natural things and taken away its life. Another intimate thing that has been hijacked by the institution is worship. Did you know that everywhere in the New Testament where worship is mentioned, it is described as something that transpires between the individual and God alone? New Testament worship is a lifestyle of intimacy between a person and their God. Today it has been hijacked by the institution and worship begins at 7 p.m. and ends precisely at 7:30 p.m. on Sunday nights. We are told what to sing, how to sing it, when to raise our hands to God, when to clap our hands, when to stand up, and when to sit down. It begins when they tell us it begins, and it ends when they decide it ends. The very life of worship has been strangled out of almost everyone's personal walk. Giving is one of the most beautiful natural manifestations of a person filled with the love of God. Unfortunately, the institution has hijacked that as well. A giver today, by today's Christian standards, is a person who gives to the institution. Almost all teachings on giving today are in reference to giving to the church. Even the very essence of giving has been turned upside down. The New Testament teaches, freely you have received, now freely give. And the institution has turned it around and convinced an entire generation that if you freely give, then you will freely receive. I personally believe that the day of true giving was murdered. It was the day when the teaching of the seed faith giving was introduced to the church. Giving went from being something a person did out of love for one another to being something we are taught to do in order to get something in return. We are even told how much to give, where to give it, and when to give it. The spontaneity of giving from a heart of love has been quenched and beaten into an exact mold to fit the institution's purposes. I have said many times that the world is unaffected by that giving of the church because the church doesn't give to the world, it gives to itself. The church stiffs the world. Today's church members cannot even have relationships unless they were formed and directed by the institution. People are told where to go to cell groups, who to open up to, what to do when at a meeting, and how to do it. Nothing is allowed to happen on its own. Everything is predetermined and laid out in the exact institutional order. Gone are the days where each person chooses their own friends based on who they have a clique with or who they don't. Today's friendship is determined and ordered by the leadership. Whoever in the church links you together with someone else. If you live on the 5th Street in Maine and Mr. Jones live close to your area, they become your home fellowship group. You must open up to them and have relationship with them. Every Thursday evening at 6 sharp. Relationship begins and at almost around 7:45 it ends. You are encouraged not to have friends outside of the church. The institution dictates where you can and cannot go after work, who you can go to and where and with whom, and what you can and can do while you are there. If you look closely all throughout the institutions, you will find that almost every single area of a person's life is taken over and hijacked by the institution. Even things like hearing from God have been taken away. People are taught that the way they hear from God is through the pastor or through others in the institution. Even the most personal things of all are stripped away. The beauty and honor of being responsible for your children growing up with an understanding of the heart of God is hijacked away from you. Now the institution makes no bones about the fact that they believe it's their responsibility to teach your children. If you don't bring your kids to the classes, you are failing. How has this happened? In the beginning, the institution of church served people. Today, it has been reversed. The people are taunted and manipulated into serving the institution. I do believe it's time for people to take a stand and yell, "Freedom!" We need to take back what was stolen from us. In closing, you might recognize one or two or more things you have heard me say. You might ask yourself, yes, I recognize there's more to the Christian life than what the institutional church has offered me, but how do I go from here? What to do if I can't find a grace-based church where I live? In the next video, I'll share some insights and give you some food for thoughts and some leads as answers to your question. So go ahead and watch part 2 of this 2-part series on why I don't go to church anymore. I thank you for watching and I see you in the next video.